Hi, this is Jeffrey Tucker, and you're listening to the Libertarian Christian Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You might also consider supporting this podcast by sharing it and even donating. LCI needs your help so it can continue creating great content.
Welcome to the show that gets Christians thinking about faith and politics. Get ready to challenge the status quo, expand your imagination, and tackle controversy head on. Let's stand together at the intersection of faith and freedom. It's time for the Libertarian Christian Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm Doug Stewart, and this week we have a special guest who is a musician. Zama Rripa is a liberty, peace, and love-minded singer-songwriter musician currently living in Miami, though he is from Los Angeles, California. He's toured and performed the world over as a solo artist and in multiple stylistically diverse bands. He is also a friend, neighbor, son, brother, husband, father, and a Christian. His new record, American Soul, is currently available at all digital stores worldwide. Zama Rripa, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Love your show.
Well, thank you. We do our best, and what we're going to do with some of your work today is we're actually going to play some clips of some of your music. Thank you for letting us do that in this episode. And so, listeners, throughout the episode, you'll hear some clips from his music. But let's just say right at the outset, like, where are some popular places people can listen?
So the record is available at every digital store worldwide, from iTunes to Apple. You should be able to find it anywhere. And if you can't, go to my website, IamZamaRripa.com, and there's information there.
All right, and we'll put a link on the show notes page as well. I heard you on Apple Music, and so I get to I subscribed to that and was able to find you there. It was pretty easy to do. So let's get a little bit of your bio. Like, I kind of read, a little bit of the basics, of course, to kind of introduce you. But how'd you get into music? Have you always been a libertarian, or did that come about through a series of processes?
A series of processes, although my first instincts and first memories were very libertarian oriented. My first memories, I think most human beings can say this, my first memories are tied to music. I remember songs evoke smells and memories and feelings that we first have at 3-4 years of age. So there's always been a connection to that. So I first got into music in the church. I was raised in the Christian church. My parents were both Baptist. So my first musical memories are singing in the choir and doing the church plays. And like I said earlier, being a human being, most of our memories are tied to music. Music is the soundtrack of our lives. And every important thing that ever happened in my life, from my wedding to the first time I got A's on a report card, it's all tied. There's a song that goes with that. So I think most people can say that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up as well. Like, just there are a few things that, like, a few places in my life, and one of them happens to be like a small diner that had a jukebox that people played music, and I remember several country songs coming from that jukebox, and it's just kind of part of my childhood. So, music's a really important aspect. When did you become like a songwriter, performer?
So I've always written since I can remember, probably middle school. I've always kept journals, and sometimes it's just little things dotted down. Other times it's poems. Other times it was in song. I did play piano as a kid, and then that moved more into guitar. And in high school, I did chorus and this and that. But I was never took formal instruction in the guitar. So I've been writing forever, off and on through the different things I've done in my life.
Okay, so that's your music, your music development, kind of origins there. When did you start calling yourself a libertarian?
That's tied to that. I said I've always had libertarian sensibility since I was a kid, and always a strong sense of justice. And I think part of that comes from nature and nurture. Like I said, my parents were. We moved around a lot. Also, my parents were in the military, so both of them were in the Air Force. So we moved around a lot. The libertarian, which is somewhat ironic, the libertarian sensibilities came somewhat from feelings of justice and probably the things that we learned in church, how to conduct yourself. But I remember specifically when I really had an eye-opening moment, it was in middle school, and we were being taught Henry David Thoreau in English class. And I believe it was Walden Pond, but I was curious about him. Seemed like a very interesting person. So I remember going to the library. This is seventh grade, and looking up more on Thoreau. And I came across civil disobedience, and then you learn that he was jailed because he refused to pay taxes. He didn't want his taxes supporting war and slavery and the like. And that hit like a bolt of lightning. First of all, it seemed so radical at the time. So that was to learn that. And that's the stuff we weren't being taught in school. We didn't learn about things like that, or the Federal Reserve, or a lot of other things we don't learn about until we really jump into libertarianism. But that was the first time I thought, wow, that's radical. And what does this mean? So that kicked open the door, so to speak. And during that time, during Thoreau's life, that was the big battle over slavery. That was around the time of the Civil War. And so that opened the door to learning about him, led me to Lysander Spooner, other abolitionists, and just a different way of thinking about liberty. Because, of course, we're raised, at least we were when I was in school, we're raised, talking about the sensibilities and the philosophy of the founding fathers. So it's all liberty to some degree or another. But going the Thoreau route and looking at those other influences was very radical. So that's when it started, and it grew over the years. It developed more, libertarianism developed more, especially after 2001 for me also. Like I said, it was always on the radar. I never looked deeply or studied it deeply. But after 2001, I started listening to somebody that a lot of us listened to, and that was Ron Paul. And I was always on the fringe for me. I don't say that in a bad sense, but he was always on the fringe because you'd always hear him pop up, but I never really knew much about him. Always seemed like a great guy, a solid guy, but I didn't really immerse myself in the philosophy. But after 2001, I started listening more and said, wow, that sounds dead on. I agree with everything that guy just said. And whether it was a debate or whatnot. And then that led me, at the same time, I decided to go back to school, and I was studying economics. And so it was kind of serendipitous. That led me to the Mises and the Hayek and the Rothbard. Again, figures who aren't taught in formal education. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. Well, that's interesting. Like your gateway experience was through to libertarianism, or the idea that there's something immoral about what the state is doing and funding it was through Henry David Thoreau.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, like I said early, my parents were in the military, so there's a lot of structure there, ironic again. But like I said, they were raising us Baptists. So they didn't work out my family. I come from a broken home, which also informs the art. But they tried really hard to give us those values. So not only was I learning the economics and the anti-war stuff and the nature of government, but it seems to dovetail perfectly. I had a hunch over time that it was dovetailing perfectly with the teachings of Christ. So you have these things converging, and that's when it really started to crystallize and become more powerful. And it's almost like a revelation. Just it seemed truthful and honest, that intersection.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me that somebody who grew up in a military family would, at the very least, give lip service to the notion of individual rights and freedom. I mean, even the most statist Republicans would give lip service to the idea that, we're fighting for freedom. It might be just our freedom, which is kind of what it is today when people argue about America's freedom. But did you have any, do you recall as a kid, kind of being in a freedom-loving family, even if it wasn't quite libertarian as we understand it today?
That's interesting. The sensibilities were there, but also, and maybe given that generation, both my parents, there was a lot of patriotism. I felt that. I would get goosebumps when the anthem would played and when the jets fly overhead, but I think it was more off the moment rather than patriotism. Something always seemed suspect to me. Now I can articulate it. At the time, I just remember thinking, it seemed a little blind to me. And of course, not to disrespect anybody or anything or any institution, the deeper you go into Christianity and libertarianism and economics, you really see the blatant immorality of that. And you see that that's totally at odds and in tension with the teachings of Christ.
Yeah.
And really common sense and any morality, whether you're a Christian or not. One of the big kickers for me before 9/11 was I remember seeing this live. I was very young, but I remember seeing it live, and it was Madeleine Albright. I believe it was 1998 with Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, and Clinton was president. It was obviously it was after the first Gulf War, and I remember Leslie Stahl asking her, and this was a profound moment too that I'll always remember, asking her, so 500,000 Iraqi children have died as a result of U.S. sanctions on Iraq. Is that cost? Is that worth the price of our foreign policy? And Madeleine Albright, you may have seen this clip. A lot of people have.
I know where you're heading. I know what this is.
She didn't miss a beat. She said, well, yes, we think it's worth the price. That's appalling. And I don't know how so many Americans or anybody with a heart or a mind can sit there and not be appalled right off the bat.
Can you imagine the media actually questioning Obama during his administration? And I mean, of course, they're going to question everything Trump decides to do. But absolutely. Can you imagine Obama sitting down with somebody and being asked that question?
Absolutely not. And in fact, on this note, and I think you'll probably agree with me, I think Obama was probably the worst thing to happen to the anti-war movement that I've ever seen. We remember when he came in office, there was a very radical and necessarily so anti-war movement. He completely erased that.
Yeah, they all went home.
They all went home. They stopped. And they're kind of coming back with Trump, but again, they're not even attacking Trump so much for the war stuff. They're attacking him on other things. So yeah, I think Obama was appalling, not just for liberty, but for our moral conscience as a nation. Absolutely.
Yeah. I actually know somebody who I used to work with, and this person basically said, like the day after Trump was elected, that, well, at least now they can go start protesting wars again.
Yes.
Maybe they just said protesting, but it's possible. I'm pretty sure that person said protest against war. And I'm like, really? Like, this is where all the libertarians are like, dear anti-war left, welcome back. Welcome back,
exactly. And there was some great, the meme world got a lot of mileage over those sentiments.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yes, so true. We could go on and on about that, but yes, it's so true.
Yeah, well, I want to give our listeners a little taste of your music. So what I'm going to cue up here is your song, Live and Let Live. And it represents your life philosophy because it's related to the Golden Rule. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on the song?
Well, yes. So yes, live and let live. I've always felt that way. I felt, like I was saying, I felt that way as a child before I could even really articulate it through the framework of liberty and live and let live has always been the philosophy. There was a book I was reading recently. It's called Foundations of Private Property Society Theory by Anarchism for the Civilized Person by Robert Wenzel. He had a small passage in there on it. It's a live and let live philosophy. That has always been my philosophy. You match that to the Golden Rule, which is the law of love, which I think Christianity distills down to love your neighbor as yourself, love God. But that's a powerful suggestion. It's a powerful thing to say. And again, that pretty much sums it up. In that song, that's one of the more explicit libertarian songs. And it touches a lot of topics in there. So thank you for mentioning it. Takes away bittersweet by and by. We're running out of time. By and by. Bittersweet by and by. Live, let live. All right, you get yours. I get mine. What's going on? Ain't hardly civilized. If you want to survive, it's time to realize, live and let live, all right.
So that was the song Live and Let Live by Zama Rripa, who is actually with us here on this episode. And, we're going to queue up another song here actually pretty shortly. And I think it's really interesting. You actually wrote a post-Trump election song about the phenomenon of, basically people not being really happy about Donald Trump being elected.
Live your thing. Yes, there we go. That again, that's another great philosophy to live by. Obviously, it was some of the lyrics in there. I was watching the news, and the lyrics seemed to just tumble out because, like we were saying, people seem to have lost their minds over the election of Trump, where somebody like you, Doug, or I were sitting there saying, "Hey, this has been going on the whole time. It's not just Trump." But the live your thing does come from that. And again, we can say that to anybody. I'm a dad as well. I have children. I say that to my kids, and I certainly say that to my fellow artists. You got to be true to yourself, and you have to be honest. And that's the only way to be. There's a line in that song, "You are what you repeatedly do." Again, that comes from the intersection of Christianity and economics and libertarianism. And so, yeah, live your thing. Be as honest and real as you can, not only with yourself, but with God and with everyone in your life.
Go, and find out what it means to be free. You're a human being. Go live your thing. Baby, go live your thing.
So you've been listening to Live Your Thing by Zama Rripa, who's here with us to talk about his music and his life being a libertarian. So I have a question for you here that's kind of related to the music that you write. What are some of your favorite topics as a libertarian? You insert that into some of your music from time to time, you insert that into your music. And so, but when you have a conversation with people and people get into stuff, related to politics and faith and ethics and things like that, so what are some of the more fun, interesting topics that you like to talk about as a libertarian?
As a libertarian, well, I think all of it, of course, we like to talk about all of it. But I think the most important, within the context of the intersection of libertarianism and Christianity and economics, again, that's the three. I think the most important issue that all American and the world, but we're in America now, and we do have the world's reserve currency in the dollar. I think the most important issue is the issue of money. And I've always wondered what this country would be like if more Christians, as what do the polls say, some 70% of Americans identify as Christians, if Christians looked to the Bible and what the Bible says about honest weights and measure and money. There is a mandate, a biblical mandate for honest money. And so I think that is the most important issue. As we know, whoever controls the money controls everything. And when I say money, I mean money as a means of exchange. And as we know, we have a Federal Reserve in the United States. And when your money is distorted, seeing that it's the one thing every American in the world has in common, we're forced to use the same money here. When the money is distorted, all of our interactions are distorted. And that's distilled down. That's the truth. One mandate for being a Christian, one of the commandments, do not steal and do not cheat. Anyone looking at our monetary system, we have to admit that it's theft and it's cheating. We can elaborate that on if you want, Doug, if it needs more.
I agree with you. I think it's one of the most important issues that people don't really talk about. I've tried to get my left-leaning friends to take more seriously the printing of money and the effects that it has on, at first it has bad effects on those who are the poorest in society. Yeah. And, I read a headline about an hour before we went on to record this about something along the lines of, 1 year after the tax. I mean, the headline was clearly biased. 1 year after the tax scam, the evaluation is that Trump's tax plan is the largest wealth transfer from the poor to the rich ever. And I'm like, wow, what a weird way of using the word transfer. But even so, I'm like, if there's any sort of policy or practice that the federal government, and I realize that the Federal Reserve is technically a private institution, but I mean, clearly we all know that that's not quite the case. And so I'm like, if there's anything you should be angry about, it should be something like that too.
Absolutely.
I remember as becoming a libertarian, I mean, this was like, and I have some left-leaning sensibilities, and I'm listening to this and I'm like, if you care about the poor, you care about the Federal Reserve, but they won't touch it for some reason. So
Absolutely.
Why is it important that that honest money is important for society?
Well, again, the Federal Reserve is the sacred cow to the left and the right. But you mentioned the effects on the poor, and nothing eats away at the poor and the vulnerable in society like inflation. And it's a hidden tax. It's theft. I remember thinking this who's the football? Colin Kaepernick. I remember thinking this when he did the Nike thing a few months ago when Nike touted him. And again, nothing against him or at face value, nothing against what he's doing. But I remember thinking how beneficial it would be if he would actually go nitty gritty into the details on the mechanisms, the real world mechanisms, because we can point and shout racism all we want. We never know what's in a person's heart. But there are real world mechanisms which are destroying poor, disenfranchised, vulnerable communities in the United States, and they all come from inflation. It reminds me, there's a quote from Keynes himself, the architect of the American economy, and this is very important. I always bring this up, and it's funny you mentioned some of your left friends. I bring this up with both left and right friends. Here's Keynes, as most people might know, or if they don't know, Keynesian economics is the dominant school of economics in the United States. If you get an economics degree, you go through Keynesianism. Basically, he designed the Western economies and now the world economies, but it's based on inflation and central banking. So this is Keynes, though, early on, around the same time Mises was writing Socialism and some of his other great works. Keynes said this is before his system was really used around World War II. He says, Lenin, and he means Lenin, the Russian leader. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of their wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily. And while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. The sight of this arbitrary rearrangement of riches strikes not only at security, but also at the confidence in the equity of the existing distribution of wealth. Those to whom the system brings windfalls beyond their deserts and even beyond their expectations of desires become profiteers, who are the object of the hatred of the bourgeois, whom the inflationism has impoverished, not less of the proletariat. As the inflation proceeds and the real value of the currency fluctuates wildly from month to month, all permanent relations between debtors and creditors, which form the ultimate foundation of capitalism, become so utterly disordered as to be almost meaningless, and the process of wealth getting degenerates into a gamble and a lottery. Here's the clincher. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Keynes himself, the architect of this economy, who would actually be appalled at what's been done in the name of Keynesianism. Not that I'm saying he's a great guy. This is what he said before he sold out to power in the system. He's right, of course, to anyone familiar with central banking and fractional reserve banking. But as we see, what we see now, the existing basis of society being overturned, that's exactly what he was talking about. And we can ask why. We can go through the reasons why. Well, Keynesian economics, the fractional reserve banking, the Fed, when it inflates, which properly means an expansion of the money supply, that's what funds the war on drugs, which wreaks havoc on every American, and also empowers the gangs over the borders. It's this inflation which funds civil asset forfeiture, which funds the welfare state, which incentivizes people to not get married and to not work, which incentivizes all manner of moral hazard. It pays for the wars that we're engaged in. And it is bankrupting us, as we both know. We could go on, but if we want to look at real world mechanisms which would help the plight of the poor and vulnerable, the first place we should be looking at is the Fed and inflation, as Keynes himself says.
Yeah. Yeah, we both talk about our left friends and things we bring up. I always tell them, like, the first two things we should, get rid of is the foreign policy of occupation around the world and the Federal Reserve. And then let's talk, because to some extent I'll negotiate some of the rest, but that's like a huge, like, if they want social justice, those are going to be the two largest ways to get make a huge leap in that direction.
Yes. And again, I've said it like you have to, especially the friends on the left, in the Colin Kaepernick crowd. I don't take him seriously because he's not talking about these things. He's had years to try to figure out what's going on. We can't just say police brutality. We can't just say racism. These things are in front of our faces. And there's great economists out there like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams who have been talking about this stuff for decades. There's no excuse not to know and not to reach deeper, because it really is simple. Basic economic law is very simple. There's no excuse. None of us have an excuse, left, right, wherever, to not understand this. And also, you probably agree with me on this. We know our leaders understand it. They know. They know exactly what their policies are doing. We talked about Trump a couple of years ago while campaigning. He was critical of the Fed, and he identified exactly what the Fed is doing and the giant bubble we were in. Well, now he's not so happy because once he got in office, he wants to do the same thing that he was accusing Obama and Hillary of wanting to do. But these people know, they're not stupid. Obama's not stupid. Bush is not stupid. Trump is not stupid, despite what the media tells us. They know what their policies are doing. They have to. And again, we should know them by their fruits. Well, look at their fruits. Yeah. It's awful. But going back to this too, not only does the honest economist understand the consequences of inflation, we go back to the Bible. Again, it's, we have verse after verse. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. He's talking about money. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measures of length or weight or quantity. Unequal weights and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to the Lord. It goes on and on. It's in there. It's throughout the Bible, and that's one thing Christians need to get back to and understand. You shall not steal. You should not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. That brings us to another thing: child rearing. I look at these politicians today from both sides, and I wish more Christians would say this too. They do every day the exact opposite of what we teach our children to do. And it begs the question, why do we not hold the government and our politicians to the same standards we hold each other to? That's always been one question of mine too. They should not be exempt just because they're government. The government should be, and this isn't the song Live and Let Live. The government should not be able to do anything that we can't do to each other. I'll just keep going on and on here. Now that you got me rolling now.
You could go the whole way. Well, I wanted to ask you, I have a question written down here. How do you think Jesus would be treated if he were alive today in America?
So I have a song on the record on that. It's called Stone of Freedom. And I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were actually talking about, there was a great article from John Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute. He's a civil liberties attorney. Great site. I recommend it. And he puts out a article a week or so. But he asked this question. And I was talking to a friend. That's what the song grew out of. We went back and forth on it. And it's a great question just that they're out there. My feeling is I don't think most people who identify with Christians would accept him as Christ. You'd think he was a homeless person, a bum. And certainly it would be just like 2,000 years ago. He would be the greatest threat, perhaps, to the government, the federal government. And both Republicans and Democrats alike would probably find a way to kill him or keep him locked up and throw away the key. I think of that quote by Lenny Bruce: if Jesus had been killed 20 years ago, this is in the 60s, Catholic school children would be wearing little electric chairs around their necks instead of crosses.
Right, yeah.
And that's probably where Jesus would end up nowadays if he came to America today. That's a fascinating question to think through. How many people do you know would recognize him as Christ? Would we even recognize him? You know, I mean,
Well, I think you would have what you had back then. I think the poor would recognize him first, and a
yeah,
small selection of the wealthy, depending on, being wealthy in our day versus being wealthy in that day was a little different. There was a different character, different ways in which people became wealthy, and probably, I would say, roughly the same. He would be,
yeah,
not very recognizable except for to those who are able to see God working in ways that are unexpected.
yes.
So yeah, no, your song. I mean, I want to play it here, and it sounds like you just gave us the story of how it came about. So this is "Stone of Freedom."
Roll on, stone of freedom into the sun. The light of freedom is the only one. Roll on, stone of freedom.
So that was "Stone of Freedom" from Zama Rripa. Before we continue on, we were talking about one of your favorite topics, money production and the Federal Reserve. Do you have any other favorite topics?
You know, that's at the center. I love everything. We could talk forever and ever. Just ask my wife. So,
Do you argue with her over like the nitty gritty libertarian stuff? You said she was a libertarian also.
oh yes, no, not at all. She's on the same page. She usually just acts like she's listening, and I keep rambling. So she's a very patient woman. God, she's a saint. So yes, but we see eye to eye. That's one thing. One thing. My wife and I have known each other since high school. Like I said, she's a very patient woman and very forgiving woman. So we're pretty much, come to think of it, we're pretty much on the same page with everything, which is nice. We're honest with each other. So yeah, but yeah, she doesn't have. She is generally quiet while I ramble on and on. The coffee is working, I say.
Yeah, I got you.
But another topic we've touched on is the blowback, which of course I think we talked a little bit about that already. But of course the term comes from Michael Schur, the former head of the Bin Laden unit, which is a reap what we sow observation. And the more we intervene in other affairs in foreign nations, the more blowback we get in the form of people hating us and wanting to fly planes into our buildings. And also, there's blowback with everything. There's blowback with the inflation that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
But that, there's blowback with everything.
You know what people hear when they hear people talk about blowback? Like, I know Ron Paul talked about this when he ran for president in 2008, I guess. And he talked about blowback, and immediately everybody was like, "Oh, so you're blaming America?"
Yes.
I'm
exactly.
like, are you kidding me? Like,
I
no, that's not what we're saying.
Exactly. There's that famous interchange between him and Giuliani. Yeah. Well, first of all, if you look at things clearly, people can't be that intellectually dishonest. But yeah, the accusation of you hate America. I always say to that, I love what America was founded on. Up until that time, it was the best idea in history, the Constitution and what the founding fathers intended.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to say this, but slavery aside, of course,
Yeah.
we have to say that now.
Well, but when you say what America was founded on, it wasn't founded on the institution of slavery. I know a lot of people on the left want to believe that. The principles themselves had embedded in them the origins of the abolition of slavery. I mean, even up until the Civil Rights era, you had Martin Luther King Jr. using the founding fathers as like his reason for promoting civil rights.
Absolutely.
And
Thank
so,
you for
like,
saying that,
why on earth, like,
saying
he didn't bring up some new principle that the founding fathers forgot to think about.
Yes, and as you know, I mean, they debated ad nauseum about. I mean, that was a hot topic, and most of them were disgusted by the institution of slavery. But yes, that was the best document. Going back to that too, it's important, I think, to point out that the founding fathers warned against everything we're doing nowadays too. They warned against foreign entanglements. They warned against standing armies, and they certainly warned against central banking, except for Hamilton, who's now as we know, is a champion of Broadway. So it's interesting to point that out. So when we get accused of hating America first or blaming America first, say, no, I love what America is founded on. But to anybody with a heart and soul looking at America today, that's not what we are doing today is so far from what we were supposed to do. So
yeah,
that's an important thing because, I've been accused of that so many times.
Well, and you quote Thomas on your website. You have a quote from Thomas Paine: "The duty of a true patriot is to protect his country from its government."
Yes,
and
yes.
I think Blowback is a really good example of one of the things that governments do to their citizens. Not every citizen knows that something like 9/11 was the result of blowback for previous actions by the United States.
Yes,
there isn't always a one-to-one correlation to these things, of course, but there are, in some cases there are. And there's been books written about it. Ron Paul is, of course, a proponent of, hey, we got to watch what we do. We can't be the bully of the world.
Yeah.
I saw a meme once. This was probably about, good 5-6 years ago. And it was when everybody was worried about Iraq. It was when everybody was worried about Iran. And it said, and it had a map of the Middle East, and it had all of the military bases, and it had Iran highlighted, and it says, look, Iran is preparing for war. Look how close they put their country to our military bases.
Yes, I've seen that. It's brilliant. Absolutely. Brilliant.
It just shows the illogic of people
Yes.
worried about things. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be worried about blowback. I mean, it's fine to be worried that there will be terrorist attacks and, that we need to prevent that. But one way to prevent an illness is by treating the symptoms, and another way is by treating the cause of the illness itself.
Absolutely. We didn't learn our lesson. And going back to your point there, Bin Laden had said for years, and he still said, the reason we do this and attack you back is because you're here. They don't want us in the Holy Land. We're Holy Land. Again, Bin Laden spelled it out for everyone, the reasons why they hated America, as much of the world is doing now. And it's because we intervene. Of course, the world's not a perfect place and people are still going to hate you no matter what you do. But when Bin Laden comes out and says those things, he also predicted a death by 1,000 cuts, which is working. And that meant his goal after 9/11 wasn't to defeat the United States militarily, but to kill us by draining our economy through the debt and keeping us engaged in an endless war that we can't win. And now, when 2001 happened, we were $5 trillion in debt, and now we're $23 trillion in debt. And Trump just signed off on nearly $1 trillion defense, Orwellian named defense, which is more of an offense bill. But we're still not listening to the rest of the world on that. And no, are we saying they're better or greater? No, of course not. We're just, to me, it makes perfect sense. We got attacked. Oh, why did they hate you? It's like, it's like with our children. One of them complains that the other one threw something at them. Or the other, well, why'd you do that? Oh, because I threw something at him. Yeah, I mean,
It's funny to me that my children actually admit it when that happens. I'm like, so you don't understand the relationship? You slapped her, and therefore she kicked you in the shin.
Yes.
I'm like, yeah, but she kicked me in the shin. I'm like, well.
That's a great point, Doug, because it's interesting once you have children, you see all these very simple concepts that we as adults miss, and kids, not only are they more honest about it, but it's so simple to them,
Right, right.
On that note, but that's a blowback. On that note, my daughter was incensed a week ago. I was watching the news and something on Yemen came on, and she's 9, my daughter, and something on Yemen came on, and she said, what's going on there? So I talked to her a little bit about it and explained the U.S.'s role in that, and that our tax dollars pay for it. And the look on her face, not only was she emotionally devastated looking at the photos, and she didn't see the worst of the photos, but you see children starving. It's awful. And she looked at me like, Daddy, why aren't you doing anything about it? And that, when you get a moment like that and you see those kids over there, that's when it really sinks in. And I look at other Americans and I just wonder, why are we not doing more about that? So,
Yeah, it's pretty amazing the kind of things that we can't focus on. One, because it might be kind of difficult to feel like there's any headway in it. I mean, I hope those of us in the liberty movement are moving the ball toward the goal of getting more people involved, especially in the kinds of things that are related to war and that are literally aggressive things happening by our government. I mean, we could talk about the inadvertent things that government causes that are bad for the poor or bad for the middle class or whatever, but like there's actual proactive things going on that we can be outraged about as well.
Beyond speculation, beyond the conspiracy and speculation. That's so true. But again, we will have to, I wish everybody had to answer to children of the future on what we're doing like that, because that really brings it home, I think. Big time.
Well, I want to play your song Blowback, so we just kind of talked about that, and we're going to let that be the lead out for the episode. I just want to thank you again, Zama Rripa, for being with us for the Libertarian Christian Podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I love what you do. I love what the organization does. Going forward, I just have one more thing to say, and it's the importance, if we need to get out of this, because we probably know there's going to be more turbulent times ahead. We need love. We need grace. We need mercy. We need to take care of our friends and neighbors. It starts horizontally, but we can't forget, we've got to live by the golden rule. That's the only way out. Politics is not the answer. We don't have all the answers, but because it works horizontally in our communities and our families, it's got to start with love and grace and mercy. And we need to apply those same principles to our government.
Amen to that. Great way to go out. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Doug. Have a good day.
Who's got the biggest bombs dropping across God's good earth? Who started all this death, destruction, and hurt? It's no secret who they are, masters of war, but who's paying for it? Who's got malware worms hacking the whole wide world? Who's behind such fearful symmetry, trouble and toil? The CIA's been caught red-handed inside everybody's door, but by whom is the cost borne? We pay for it twice, that's how the story goes. Once with our taxes, 2 times with our souls. And where this all goes, everybody should know. You better believe it, boy. We reap what we sow.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast. If you liked today's episode, we encourage you to rate us on Apple Podcasts to help expand our audience. If you want to reach out to us, email us at podcast@libertarianchristians.com. You can also reach us at LCI Official on Twitter. And of course, we are on Facebook and have an active group you are welcome to join. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Libertarian Christian Podcast is a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute, a registered 501c3 nonprofit. The audio engineers were Doug Stewart and Jason Rink, and voiceovers were by Matthew Bellis and Caitlin Horn. If you'd like to find out more about the LCI, please visit us on the web at www.libertarianchristians.com.